Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we have another amazing topic, and our guest is a woman that I have admired for many, many years, not only for her job ethics, but as a person, as a philanthropist, and as a mentor. So, Alicia Cervera, welcome.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me. Well said in terms of the introduction. I could say the same thing about you. We've been friends for a long time. You also are an inspiration. You're a doer, and it's great to hear from you and great to celebrate your success. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished.
Alicia, can you tell us a little bit, for those who do not know you, a little bit of your background? What's it up? I know the podcast that you have now.
Yes. Well, especially this week, I have to start by saying that I'm a proud Cuban by birth. And of course, this week, particularly close to my heart, as I'm so saddened by the atrocities that the Castro communist regime in Cuba is inflicting upon our people, and join them in the spirit and the camaraderie of the fight, and hope that the American government and the people around the world will support the cause and help us triumph over this horrible dictatorship that has plagued our country now for 62 years. I'm also of Peruvian heritage because mom is from Peru, and of course a very proud American by choice because I had the privilege of becoming a citizen in my teens. So our company history is now 52 years that we've been selling real estate, residential luxury real estate, but also commercial real estate in Miami. And we were lucky enough to come into a country that extends so many opportunities and a city that was so fertile for growth, and have mom's vision, who is a founder of our company, Alicia Cervera Sr., who saw a vertical city where there was no vertical city, where there was a horizontal town, let's call it. And here we are now today in this incredible cosmopolitan center, not only of South America, but really at a city that's attracting the attention of the world for everything we've done, but more than anything, for everything we are as a people in Miami, because we reflect what the world wants to be. Whereas a city that's well integrated, that is forward thinking, that is open to new ideas, that gets things done. We're not afraid of rolling up our sleeves. And to that credit of the Miamians, as we're collectively known, and the Southeast Floridians, we have accomplished great things together.
And the second city of Latin America.
Yes. Yes, and the Caribbean, and so much more now. Really, it's becoming really the city of the United States. So our new migration flow. The other day, I was in a meeting, and one of the guys in the room introduced himself as a refugee from California. So I said, "Well, that says a lot, you know."
Well, that's the problem. That's one of the things that I was going to ask you. That goes into perfectly to open the door to my first question. Miami is booming.
It is.
People are getting literally knocks on their doors. Please sell me your house. Sell me your apartment. What's your vision? Is this true, or this is just a marketing stunt?
I think it's absolutely true. Miami is definitely booming. And anybody who's questioning that, all they have to do is look at the hard numbers in terms of the population growth, because people are moving into Southeast Florida, into Miami in droves. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the country. And obviously those people need to live somewhere. And the rental market, as you know, is completely saturated. It's almost impossible to find a rental unit or a rental house, even harder. So if you're going to go look for something, you better go with your checkbook in hand and be ready to pay on the spot. And I mean your checkbook, because a wire transfer takes too long, which is unbelievable, but that's exactly how things are right now. The market is moving that quickly, and there is that much demand.
So we see, for example, in Surfside, all these huge buildings. Now we're starting to see a little more light, but there used to be a time when the building was completely black. Like, are people really living there, or they're just investment opportunities to flip them?
Well, for the most part, Gladys, people have always really lived there. The lights were on, just not all the time. Because the reality is that we live in a world where people travel a lot and they move around a lot. And particularly in the United States, because of our tax structure, people who lived in those units oftentimes couldn't live there for more than, I think it's 120 days a year.
180.
Yes, or a different tax structure set in. So those units were always sold. And for the most part, somebody was living there at some part of the year. They may not have been living there 365 days a year. And that will continue to happen because whether they're from a foreign country and don't want to pay taxes on all of the worldwide assets in the United States, or they live in the United States and don't want to pay taxes in New York, or in California or in any of the other states that have very high taxation, it doesn't mean that they're not going to spend time there in those states that they grew up and perhaps their parents or their grandparents are there. So I think that the lights are not always going to be on in these buildings, but people need to understand that these buildings are being occupied and more they're going to be occupied full time, because Miami is becoming a full-time residence for more and more people. Now, that still doesn't mean 365 days a year because the world continues to move around more.
So what we've seen is a pattern that real estate has gone, for example, to the ultra luxury and then to the very low income. And in between, it is very difficult.
I think that the emphasis and the hoopla is around the ultra luxury. The reality is that Miami was not an ultra wealthy city. Miami, when I arrived in 1961, was a town, and there was some wealth, but it was not a preponderance of wealth. The wealth didn't come this far. The wealth stayed in Naples, the wealth stayed in Palm Beach, the wealth stayed in other cities, but it did not arrive to Miami. So all of a sudden, when this ultra wealth started arriving in Miami, we didn't have housing for those people. So I was selling buildings and they'd say, this is it? That's all you've got? What, but I need more square footage. I need more this. So then we were faced with this awkward situation of combining apartments. And they were never quite right because it was always an afterthought. So we actually had a shortage in housing for the ultra wealthy. People never think about that because they think that the ultra wealthy come in, they write a check, they get whatever they want, whenever they want. But you have to have availability. And the important thing about having availability in housing for the ultra wealthy is, generally speaking, they bring their money with them. And by that, I mean that they spend more in the community, and that money generates revenue for the community. And now more and more, they're bringing their businesses with them. So by servicing the ultra wealthy, we're servicing the entire community. These people come with big bank accounts and huge opportunities for the community. So that ultra wealth had a big vacuum. There was no product for these people. We have resolved that, and we continue to resolve that because it's sexy to build that ultra wealthy stuff, right? I've never met a developer that hasn't had that mindset of, oh, I want to build the best and the most fabulous building. And that's been great for our city because it has positioned us as the best and the most fabulous city. It's attracted the best architects. It's attracted the best interior designers. It's attracted the best brands. And it's brought a lot of attention to the city that has helped us continue to grow. And in that growth, grow opportunities for all of us. So in the middle, we had all of this inventory that was kind of the traditional inventory in Miami. And pre-pandemic, if you had looked at that inventory, a lot of people said that we had oversupply. Now, I'm not sure where you're defining ultra wealthy versus, those numbers are all a little bit fungible, but we had an oversupply in that, what I would call, middle of the road housing of normal condominiums, normal houses. There seemed to be, it was a buyer's market. And people were saying, oh, it's going to take however long it's going to take. And then the pandemic hit, and the naysayers were saying, the end of the world, right? In fact, because of our success in our city, instead of the end of the world, what we had was a huge boom. And that huge boom then has created a shortage in the middle inventory. And it's created tremendous absorption at the top. And of course, we know there's a race at the top of a huge competition for those very expensive properties and huge price appreciation. And that has not only stayed at the tip top, but has trickled down. Most people who are getting people knocking at their doors are offering them more money than they ever thought they were going to get for that home.
But where do they go? They sell their property, and where do they go? That has become the biggest issue.
Well, that's always been an issue, right? So part of the reality is some people may not want to stay in the neighborhood they are because it's not the neighborhood that they bought into originally. The neighborhoods have transformed. So they bought into a sleepy neighborhood without any traffic, with very quiet cities, where the beaches were deserted and they had their mom and pop shops, and they liked that. And you know what? That neighborhood has disappeared. It has turned into a hustle and a bustle. And yes, there's traffic and there are crowds, and you may have to fight for a place for your beach chair. And that's not for everybody. And that's okay. So for some people, they have the tremendous fortune of having an opportunity to cash out and move on. And they may move on to, maybe if they're in a house, they move to a condominium. Maybe they move to an adjacent neighborhood. Maybe they move to an adjacent state. Who knows? But lifestyles change and people's needs change and they move on. But isn't it nice that they can move on with a profit and not,
That's the beauty of this country.
Right. And by the way, no one's forcing them to sell. And because in Florida, we passed the Home Protection Act, which means that your taxes aren't getting, I don't know if that's what it's called, but anyway, your taxes won't raise more than a very small percentage. I think it's 3% a year or something. If you're homesteaded in your property, they're not getting forced out because their taxes are going up by leaps and bounds, like has happened in other situations. So they're protected in their homestead. And if they choose to stay, they can stay. But if they want to cash out and, change their lifestyle, move to another neighborhood, move to a smaller place, move in with kids, become renters, they have now money to do that with. It's a wonderful thing.
That's a very good way of putting it. So when the pandemic started, a lot of the people didn't want to move, didn't want to live in condos because it was the elevator, you got in with other people, you were stuck in an apartment, pools were closed. So the boom of the houses became like every single house available was sold.
Right.
Is that a trend that will continue or is it stopping now?
Well, I think I would tell my friends who were selling houses and they would call me and say, it's the time for the houses. I would say, absolutely, you're right. Enjoy it. Because most people don't like being quarantined in their car for an hour and a half a day when they're driving back and forth from work. They'd rather take the elevator downstairs, walk to their favorite bar, have a drink, go to a great restaurant, and then go to a Heat game, So I think life is about choices. And I don't think that long-term we're going to plan our life around the tragedy of a pandemic. I think we're going to plan our life around the lifestyle that is more favorable to us. And people who like to live in the city live there for a bunch of reasons. They like the walkability, they like the access to their work, they don't like to be in traffic, they like the sense of community. There's a whole bunch of reasons why people like to live in cities. And it's proven to be a pretty effective model. And if anything, I think that the biggest shift that the pandemic is going to create is not one of people living in condominiums versus houses, but rather one of people having more freedom to live in the community, in the neighborhood, in the city, in the state that they want to live. And I think the big win that we could have as a result of this pandemic is that the disintegration of the family that happens so often in the United States because kids leave for college and they never go home has been put in check now, because a lot of these kids have gone home And they said, boy, isn't it wonderful to be in Smallville, wherever, where my parents and my grandparents and my high school friends are. And, I like the way they make a burger, and I can still have my great job. I can work remotely, and my kids can grow up with their families. So I think that that's a bigger shift. And then that was a choice that many people did not have, and now they have it. And I think that is a wonderful opportunity to really elevate the fiber of our country and reunite families in ways that perhaps we thought would never be possible to do again.
But that was also the result of the high prices being put in, for example, rentals that young people couldn't afford. And
But,
some of them had to go to their parents.
You know what, Gladys, that was I don't think that that's what happened here. That the high prices were people living in cities that they never left. So if you were living in San Francisco and you were born in San Francisco, you studied in San Francisco, and you were living in San Francisco, then you maybe had to move in with your parents. But if you went away for college, got a job in New York City, you figured out the rent in New York City, but you were stuck there. Now you had kids, and you got married, you had kids, you were planning a life, but you were still stuck in New York City. That is the kind of mobility that I'm seeing back to their communities, which is very, very different from what you're talking about. That conversation of affordability within a community, and San Francisco is a great example because it's one of the richest cities in the country and has one of the biggest homeless problems in the country and has one of the biggest affordability problems in the country. And that is called bad government, because San Francisco decided that being a small scale, low rise village was more important than building housing and a community for the people that lived and worked there. Aesthetics became more important than human quality of life. And so they refused to address their zoning. They refused to create more housing possibilities for their citizens. And they basically priced people out. And then they empowered homelessness by making it okay to live on the streets. And people on the streets had more rights than anybody else. So San Francisco is a great example of how it was done wrong. So we in Florida have done it differently. We in Florida have chosen to upzone so that we can actually have housing for the people that move here. And the other day I was having a conversation and they said, well, but is it fair that people who used to live in downtown can't afford to live in downtown now and they have to move somewhere else? And I said, well, listen, there's always been affordability issues, always. The people who were able to buy beachfront 40 years ago had more money than the people who were not buying beachfront. Correct. That hasn't changed. And the reality is that downtown Miami is fully occupied. So where do you want those people to live? Do you want them to be penalized because they can afford to live in downtown Miami? So we have to create housing for everybody. I said, I really think that that problem is more solved with good mass transit so that people can live where they can afford to live, but can also enjoy all the wonderful benefits that our city offers. And they can do that by commuting easily.
Something that needs to be addressed. 100%. The mobility in this town really needs to be addressed. I know that with the Bright Line coming up, that they stopped it because of the pandemic, and the Aventura station is going to be open next year. So that will alleviate some of the traffic.
Right, and give people options so that if somebody wants to live in a suburban area with their yard and their swing set and all that great stuff, it's an option because they don't have to be stuck in traffic for 3 hours. They can jump on a good transportation system and get to where they need to go to. And the fact that Brightline is making us a tri-county area, a true tri-county area, is also a great thing because that people can move easily to the employment hubs and the entertainment hubs.
Totally agree. But to my next question, and we have to talk about this. I know that it was very, very hard for everyone, but after the Champlain tragedy, how does it Is it going to affect the prices of the condominiums? Are people going back? Or are they want to sell? Today there was an article in the Herald, and it was a little controversy about people wanting to sell their apartments, not sell it. So it was very confusing on what people want to do now. What's your vision on this? Nobody knows, but how do you see it?
So look, I think that when a tragedy happens of the magnitude of the Champlain Towers, what it creates is a huge pause. And in fairness, that's what it should create, is that just people take a step back and let the magnitude of the tragedy settle, if you will. And by the way, I think it went well beyond the borders of Surfside and Florida. I think it went around the world. Everybody has looked at this around the world. The real tragedy is that buildings collapse around the world all the time, and they don't make the news because that's the condition of these countries. As we see the pictures from Cuba coming in now every minute, you can see that half of Old Havana has collapsed and no one's ever talked about it. The shock here is that it happened in the United States of America. That's the shock.
It happened here because
Yes.
here there's more laws. There's
I mean,
permits,
you know what?
the whole thing.
The reality is that nothing bad is supposed to happen in the United States of America because it's the greatest country in the world and we're supposed to get it right all the time, you know, but nobody gets it right all the time. So I think that as more and more information comes out about the Champlain Towers, there were clearly very specific things to that building that ultimately resulted in this tragedy. And I think that that will become more clear. And that will give people more of a sense of understanding so that when they evaluate their own buildings and when they're building and where they're living, they will have that in proper context. So this pause has caused people who are living in high rises to ask more questions, right? How's the structure of my building? Do we need to get an engineer in here to check it? Is the proper maintenance being done? Are we on top of this? Do we have enough money to do the reserves? And ultimately, do we want to fix this building or do we want to end the condominium, terminate the condominium, and sell the entire building as a site? These are the questions that thinking people are asking. And they're rational questions. And I think that it will make us better as a result because we're going to do things better as a result. And once those questions get answered, and I think that the questions will stay with us because buyers have always asked about special assessments. Is there a special assessment? What's my maintenance, et cetera? But they were asking that, not really concerned that a building was going to fall to the ground or that thinking that a building wasn't structurally sound. They were asking that for financial reasons. They wanted to know if they were going to have to pay extra money. Now that question has become much more significant because now people want to make sure that they're buying in a building that's sound and well maintained. So I think that that's a good thing because it's going to keep everybody more accountable and it's going to help everyone make better choices. So I think, yeah. So I think that ultimately the market will continue, will carry on. I do hope that as a result of this, there's some strengthening of the laws that maintenance for structural issues in condominiums becomes a requirement and not a choice of the condo association. And I also hope that the law that was created, I'm going to say about 10 years ago, which made termination of a condominium much more difficult, in fact, gets reversed. I don't understand why. I think it's 10% of owners should force 90% of owners to stay in a building that they want to sell. And oftentimes that strategy of terminating the condominium is much more profitable for the owners of the individual units because the developer that's going to come in and redevelop that site, generally speaking, will have higher density and or if the density cannot be higher, will have an opportunity to build a new product that will yield a higher return. So they can afford to pay more for the land than the individuals will ever get selling one unit at a time. So I think that that's an important thing that should be a change that comes out of this. And I know that the 90-10 rule was with the best of intentions to protect people that wanted to stay in their homes. But those intentions have proven to be not perhaps the best. So I think we need to address that and make changes. And by the way, that also gives us an opportunity to create higher density in these areas, which will keep housing more affordable. Because if you're taking down a building that's only 12 stories and putting in a building that's 40 stories, you should be able to house more people there. And that will keep the city more affordable.
And the other part is the condominium association, that they want to fix the building, but they're voting not to do it. So now I think that for the residents, they're going to look at this in a very, very different way.
I agree, as they should. So then, not fixing it should not be an option. If there's a structural issue in the building, it shouldn't be a vote of the condominium association. It should be a mandate. It should be a law. We have to fix it. And then the only option should be, you don't want to fix it, then we have to terminate the condo and sell it. But we can't keep staying in a building that's going to deteriorate forever.
Yeah, but
So,
now they got a real example of what can happen if they fix it. So today, a judge made the decision to agree to sell the piece of land so that they could, the ones that had an apartment at the Champlain could get some money out of the sale.
right.
I've heard a lot of different scenarios that people will not buy an apartment if there's a new building standing there. That they should do a memorial or a park. But in reality, who's going to pay for a park? This piece of land is worth between $100 and $130 million.
Right. So, look, I'm sure there's some people that won't buy there because of the tragedy, but I'm also sure there's other people that will. The truth is that there are bodies probably under every house in the country. People have been dying since the beginning of time, and even at ground zero, the point of greatest tragedy in our country, ultimately they have built a building and that building is occupied. So I think that there should be some kind of carve out for a memorial for these people. I think that carve out should be an expense shared by the community, all of us who live in Florida. It should be, there's money there for parks and for other things. Also, it can be part of the impact fee for the developer who buys that land. Part of his cost will be to create a designated area, because I do think that we can't pretend this never happened. So I think having a memorial at that spot is an important thing. And I think that that's easy enough to do. But of course, these people need to get on with their lives, and we can't multiply the tragedy by not only have so many of them lost their lives, family, etc., but now on top of that, they're going to be crushed financially. It's just not fair. The decision should be for the people who have survived and the families of the people whose lives were lost. And we move forward as we always have moved forward. That's what we have to do as human beings, as a society, as a humanity.
So before we leave, because our time is over.
Okay.
I just want to say that I agree with you with the support that we're all giving the Cuban community, not only here, but hopefully that this protests are the end of communism and a whole regime that is not doing the people any good.
Thank you for that, Gladys. We can only pray. I think that if in fact we end with a successful termination to this horrible communist dictatorship, it will be spectacular for the Cuban people. It will also be spectacular for Florida and for the United States to have gotten rid of that horrible blemish in our hemisphere. And I think it will be good for all of Central and South America as they strive for successful economies. It will help other countries that are struggling with dictators like Chavez, et cetera.
Yes. And with that, thank you, Alicia. Thank you so much. to be continued. I love the way you put everything in a positive way, and I wish everybody the same. So above all, stay safe, and until next week.
Thank you,
Goodbye.
Gladys. Bye.